Champs is over, the off-season is starting, and the dev team hasn't missed a step in ushering in their first round of shakeups. While the only changes we've seen in full are the adjustments to Sunset, what we also have is a listing of the agents that are going to be touched in the first pass during patch 9.10. With that to run with, I'm going to theory craft and lay out the changes that I would make to these agents if I could. Let's jump right in. The agents we're going to look at here are going to be Sage, Cypher, Phoenix, and Harbor. All of them have very clear reasons as to why they need balance passes, but I think that there are very specific adjustments that could be made to address each of them in turn. For those of you who aren't new here, it'll come as no surprise that the first thing I want to take a look at is the style dynamics triangle and exactly where each of these agents currently falls. While none of this is critical to take note of right now, it is helpful to have a reference point and something that we can circle back around to later. Now, as we jump into these, I'm going to tackle them in order of the least impactful and dramatic changes up to the most impactful and dramatic. And so that will start us off with Sage. Out of these four, I think Sage is the agent with the change that is the most self-evident, at least to me. Barrier Sentinels as a category have always been a little bit on the finicky side, with extreme power levels back during 2020, and then localized power levels that have continued ever since. We're talking about the weird scenarios where Sage overperforms on maps like Icebox, but then sees almost no play anywhere else in the pool. I think something that's only made matters worse for Sage's identity is ironically something that has nothing to do with her or the Sentinel pool at all, and that's the release of agents like Clove and ISO. For those of you who have been around long enough, you'll remember that Sage Heal was actually nerfed. And yet, in spite of that, we've got agents like ISO and Clove that have completely redefined the boundary of what's considered acceptable for tankiness and healing in the game. So we're at a bit of a weird crossroads. Sage's kit breaks down to effectively a bunch of stall, some plant insulation in the form of her wall, as well as a heal, but stall is pretty prolific across a number of agents. The barrier provides significant and unique value, but you can sufficiently proxy it in one way or another with things like Wingman plant insulation from Gecko or Cove from Harbor, and then the heal itself has been massively power crept by other agents. So the change for me here is pretty simple and obvious. Make Sage's heal good enough to keep pace. Transfer it from the minimal heal that it currently represents to an overheal more akin to something like what Clove has, and I think we're cooking with gas. And speaking of cooking with gas, before we jump into Cypher, I wanted to quickly plug my Patreon where I cook so you don't have to. Every single patch I release a competitive queue agent tier list as well as a premier team compositions tier list, and I regularly release premier focused playbooks with deeply diagrammed protocols, executes, defaults, etc. for you to use with your teams. If the Patreon's pricing is a little too steep, but you do enjoy this type of analytical content, you can join my almost 500 member Discord down in the description below, and of course subscribe to the channel for future content. With that out of the way, let's jump right into Cypher, who I think the changes are pretty straightforward as well.
Give me a corpse.
You see, I think the issue with Cypher right now is that if we go back to the style dynamics triangle, he's very much so the deep control sentinel. And control is meant to be beaten by aggro, the whole concept being that aggro's paciness allows it to burst through whatever control has for setups. I think an issue that we're running into with Cypher currently is the fact that he's the control sentinel that's beating aggro, which is just not how that dynamic's supposed to interact. And the reason for that is his trips are very clearly anti-dive, anti-scaling, and at least as the skill level of Cypher's has increased, the counterplay that trips allow has gotten less and less. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was widespread before this, but definitely after Masters Shanghai, where Cypher players like Benji Fishy made a common occurrence of recalling and replacing their trips on front B on Sunset, I think it increased dramatically how many people were doing that recall replace play pattern, and it makes it so you can't reliably pre-shock trips anymore or use a nade to clear them out, and I don't think that that's the dynamic that's supposed to exist with that utility. You're supposed to be able to clear it out if you know what you're doing and enable yourself to have access to that paciness that you might have built towards. So the first of the two changes is just Cypher can't recall trips anymore. Once they're placed pre-round, they're placed. You can save them and not place them at the beginning of the round, but once they're down, they're stuck there. The other change I'd make, and this is more quality of life than anything else, is with the amount of neon that we're seeing, I'm a little bit tired of people slingshotting everywhere, especially in a world where trips now refresh and can trigger across multiple people. I don't think it makes much sense that when dive agents lunge or slide or dash or whatever into these trips, that they look like they just went into a bounce house. The easy fix is to make a predefined range on trips where if you hit the trip and you slide or use a movement ability to get beyond X range, the trip quote-unquote snaps and just instantly stuns you. And that's going to bring us to Phoenix, who I think marks a pretty significant departure from these first two agents who have pretty simple fixes to these second two agents that I think have pretty dramatic adjustments. You see, with Phoenix, I think we're running into something a little bit similar to what we saw with Sage, where he's just been power crept so much. And there's one specific category where it's particularly egregious. When we look at the agent pool in the duelist category, what do all of these agents have in common? Jet has untradeability via a dash. ISO has untradeability via a shield. Reyna has untradeability via her dismiss. Reins has soft untradeability via her satchels. Neon has double slides now for untradeability. Yoru has a teleport for untradeability. Phoenix? Oh wait, it's his ultimate that he gets access to a couple of times a half at most if you're funneling him. We've reached a state of balance where Phoenix is the only duelist left who doesn't have untradeability as part of his core kit, and make no mistake, I don't like this. In fact, I made a video in the past about how I thought untradeability and movement creep was going to cause major issues for the game down the road, and here we are. The viability of a specific agent is living and dying by whether or not they have this mechanic. But we've made our proverbial bed here, so we're going to have to lie in it either way, and that means figuring out with a way to introduce untradeability reliably into Phoenix's kit that doesn't break him and doesn't produce significant overlap with other duelists. My pitch for this is going to sound completely insane at first, so you're going to have to trust me and bear with me on it, but we make his ultimate his E. Before we all lose our minds, I don't mean literally his ultimate, of course. We'd tune it down. And specifically what I want here is, it's still his Phoenix form, right? He's gone out, he gets to scale up into space, but I think we make it so that it dies either to a singular point of damage or a very small amount of damage, something like sub 20 points. The goal here is to make him a source of hard informational entry by proxy, something like an Owl Drone or a Skydog would provide, but he still gets to shoot back, giving him that duelisty edge, but it also has so little health that it's fairly easy to deny, making it high opportunity cost. And so the question we're left with now is, okay, well, if we're making his ultimate more or less his E, what's his real ultimate now? And for that, I've come up with what I think is witty, but it's probably just lame. From the Ashes. In line with his whole Phoenix extra life theme, I think we give him an ultimate that is a full kit reset. The way I envision this working is he scales up into space, maybe he uses Blaze Wall, maybe he doesn't, and then he uses Run It Back, flashes himself into space, and fills that entry roll that you really need from your duelist. Then he activates from the Ashes, he gets a full kit reset so all of his abilities are back, and now Run It Back is buffed to its current state. So once he's activated his ultimate, not only does he get the kit reset, but now Run It Back, it gives him a real health bar. It's not just that one healther or that low healther. On paper, when I was thinking about this the first time around, I was like, wow, this is mega broken, it's probably too good. But then we look at other comparable examples. How is having a Run It Back with 1 health or low health any different from an ISO entrying? As long as we give it a sufficient audio cue to warn defenders, it's no better a scaling tool than what ISO already has access to. The fact that we get to reset it is also barely different from the fact that ISO gets resettable untradeability, or Jet gets a second dash, or Neon gets her second slide. It just puts Phoenix in line with, well, every other agent in his role. Not only that, but I think it does help define Phoenix's identity a lot more. Looking back at the style dynamics triangle, Phoenix is part of this weird central cluster in aggro that has clear aggro undertones, but doesn't necessarily have clear secondary typing. This moves Phoenix more towards mid-range, where he gets that depth of kit, that volume of utility, as well as that heavy incentive to contest and recontest space, but in a way that is very much so his own. And a counterpoint here that I think does have some validity to it is people would look at this and say, well, now we just have this huge stack of duelists over here in the bottom right-hand corner of the aggro segment of the triangle. And I would say, look at that segment a little bit closer and tell me if it's actually a problem. We've got 3 duelists on the exact same node with ISO, Raze, and Phoenix. In my opinion, this is actually exactly what we want, because we've got coverage from all three of the main duelist archetypes. We've got ISO, who's a second-in duelist, we've got Phoenix, who's a flash duelist, and we've got Raze, who's a dive duelist. So now we've fully saturated this aggro sub mid-range portion of the agent roster when it comes to the duelist category, and don't really have to touch it again unless we come up with something super novel and unique. Anyway, that's my pitch for Phoenix out of the way, so now we just have Harbor. Harbor's always been a bit of a funny agent to me because he's trying to do a little bit of everything. If you look at his kit, the natural inclination would be, okay, this guy's totally meant to be aggro sub mid-range. He's got utility that helps you scale fast into space with his Cascade. He's got plant facilitation with Cove. He's got a ton of utility with double high tides coming off of cooldown. He's got 2 Cascades. Everything says, okay, he's definitely aggro with a subtype mid-range, maybe mid-range with a subtype of aggro. Then you look at his kit a little bit more and you're like, wait a minute. All of his stuff slows people, so there's a clear stall undertone, and maybe he's also a lot of bit of control. And so this is the problem I think we need to look at when we look at Harbor, is he's got a ton of power, but almost to the point of just non-cohesive power bloat across his kit. We should probably remove some mechanics, replace them with others, and refine his identity to something that makes sense. And so for my money, step 1 here is get rid of the slows. A lot of people have talked about removing the team slow part of Harbor's utility, but I think that still creates a weird situation where he has a conflicting identity, so I'd rather just wholesale get rid of it and replace it with something else. Next up, I think Cove should persist past the point when it's broken. This is something people have asked for what feels like eons. I think this was suggested like literally within a week of him being released. I don't think it should be a long smoke, but Cove should absolutely extend for something like 5 to 7 seconds, even if it's broken. And here's my biggest suggestion for Harbor that personally I absolutely love. I think the timing is perfect for the way that the game has trended. The thing that we're going to replace his slow with on all of his utility is the fact that all of his smokes impede bullet damage as if they were soft walls. We're talking about a situation where an agent whose kit naturally wants him to scale aggressively, facilitate plants, carve out space in ways where it's hard for opponents to naturally flood and interact with them, and make it so that he is directly answering the offsite post-plant spam meta that has been plaguing the game. For those of you who haven't followed, I'm saying that we should make it so that his high tides and his cascades reduce bullet damage as if they were you spamming through a Radianite box or a thin wall, creating a situation where if you go into offsite post plant and a Harbor is retaking on you, you're going to have to worry about a Cove facilitating their defuse, a high tide carving you off in your main or wherever you're spamming from, and making it so that you have to rely on utility rather than bullets to secure that post plant. It would force a dynamic where if you want to play offsite post, you're going to have to plan and not spray and pray. Well, that's all I got. Short, sweet, and to the point. These are the changes that I would suggest for the 4 agents that we know are getting adjustments in the near future. Would love to hear down in the comments below whether you agree with the changes that I suggested, or you have ideas of your own that you'd love to see implemented instead. Regardless, I'm sure this off-season is going to be full of surprises coming up, and I'm looking forward to the competitive year ahead. With that all said and done, you know the deal. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.